Okay, I want to welcome everybody to tonight's QT2 webinar. It's on mental fitness tools for athletes. And actually this presentation is the second part of the first mental fitness oriented webinar we did a few months ago. That one was mental fitness, the fifth cornerstone. So the primary difference between this presentation and that presentation is that presentation was really mostly focused on just bringing people's attention and athletes' attention and aware of the primary areas where mental fitness plays into sports psychology. This presentation in particular is more a user's toolbox or an athlete's toolbox and things you can do to improve your own mental fitness. So I'm first going to brush upon some of the primary items that I raised attention to in the first presentation and then go into some of the specific tools that we could use as athletes to help improve our performance, or at least have physically limited races, which at the end of the day, that's the purpose of all of this mental fitness stuff, and to enhance our performance. If there's any issues during the presentation with my audio or visual, please feel free to punch those issues into the chat. I'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. We have the questions box in each of your control panels where you can ask questions directly in that box. Okay, so with that, I'm Jesse Kropelnicki, founder and owner of QT2 Systems. I'm a USAT Level 3 coach. So first things first, I'm going to go over the 5 cornerstones that QT2 looks after in its training philosophies and overall program. The first one is training. That's an obvious one. Most athletes hit upon that by default when they set out to do their first triathlon. The second one, which isn't quite as obvious to most beginners and amateurs, tends to get a little bit more obvious for the more advanced age groupers and professionals, is nutrition and restoration, and making sure that we're taking care of our nutrition and restoration to support the training load that we're applying. I think of these 2 items as preparatory activities. The next one would be race fueling. And the fourth one is race pacing. So these are 2 things that I think of as execution activities. Although they do require practice in training to be able to execute properly on race day, they're mostly things that are carried out on race day. So at the end of the day, it's preparatory activities like training and restoration and nutrition combined with our execution activities on race day that create race results. But then number 5, we sort of have this bogey in here, and this is mental fitness, okay? That's the 5th cornerstone, and that's where we're going to be focusing tonight. But at the end of the day, it's these 5 cornerstones that really come together to create race outcomes. If we're missing any one of these, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this on your own, if you're missing any one of these, you may not have the race performance that you had hoped for, even if your training has indicated that you should have a particular race performance. So for instance, not taking care of your race fueling and having it not be a physically limited day, which is the point of all of this. You know, we all put in quite a bit of sacrifice in training time, time away from the family so that we could have good races and race to our potential in training. And you know, other than the training cornerstone here, the other 4 have the potential of not have race day be limited by the training and hard work that you put in. So we always want to have physically limited races. And again, tonight's focus is on the mental fitness piece. So what is mental fitness here? I'm just going to go through some more rudimentary stuff to define what we're talking about. This is a common definition of competition, but it's really comparing oneself to others and putting your ego on the line in a setting that's bound by rules. So as I think about it that way, it does become intimidating right out of the box when you define it that way. And you know, it's just about putting your ego on the line out there in front of your friends and family and coaches, and if you're a more elite level athlete, your sponsors, and all of that can impose a lot of self-imposed pressures. The key with mental fitness is it's really about how the athlete lets the setting they are presented with make them feel. And as a coach, you have to be careful because you may see it very clearly and you may understand exactly what the real situation is, but what really matters is how the athlete perceives it. So you need to put yourself in that position and help the athlete try to see what the reality is, because many times the reality is much different from what the athlete sees. So it's more important about what the perception is. Perception is almost reality in this case, okay? Athletes that are mentally fit can really take any setting that they're presented with and have it make them feel good about it and confident about it. So again, it's about how you let the setting make you feel as an athlete, okay? Which at the end of the day allows their physical fitness to be the limiter on race day, which is what we're all looking for. So I just want to quickly discuss the difference between mental fitness and mental health and just put this in the right context before I actually get into the meat of the presentation. Mental health I think of as a more clinical term. It's clinical in nature. An example would be clinical depression, some of the other more clinical diagnoses. What we're discussing here today is not about mental health. It's more about using mental fitness, okay, as a way to enhance our performances out there on race day. Folks that are depressed or that have very specific anxieties in life may require more detailed look by a psychologist and may need even medical treatment in some cases. So I just wanted to put the right context around the presentation. We're discussing mental fitness here as a sport enhancing activity, okay? I should state, though, that both of these two terms can influence one another. So we need to focus on mental health before creating mental fitness. This is very similar to physical health and creating speed. Many athletes try to create speed before they've created systematic and physical health. So it's always health before fitness and health before speed, and it's the same thing here with mental health. So we need to create mental health before we can create mental fitness, okay? So you must create mental health first. Once mental health is achieved, then the athlete can work on their mental fitness. So again, mental health is the key. So if you feel that you may have a mental health issue, sometimes it's not even worth going after mental fitness. Maybe you do have to go see a psychologist and get a clinical diagnosis and make sure that you have that mental health and you're not depressed, because if you're in that situation, you'll never be able to create mental fitness no matter how hard you try at that. So how do we identify mental health as a limiter? So mental health is a limiter when you've executed the first 4 cornerstones that I listed on the first slide, and you've executed those very well, and you're still not having the race performances that you know your training indicates. In those cases, you probably have mental fitness as your limiter. So it's typically a series of races where you see this occur where they do not match the expected outcome based on the training metrics. So as you assess yourself and look back and say, okay, how many races have I had now this year where I just feel like it's always bad luck, something always seems to go wrong, I'm just an unlucky person. Most of the time in those cases it really is actually a mental fitness issue that's limiting the day. So that's the best way to assess that from a practical standpoint. So why focus on mental fitness? And a little bit of this I've already discussed, but limiters in triathlon can occur in series or parallel with one another. I think of parallel limiters as performance enhancing. So if I wear an aero helmet on race day, sure, it'll make me a little bit faster along with my race day fitness. However, if I have mental fitness as my limiter on race day, maybe I never get to show any of my physical fitness. So that's an example of a limiter that occurs in series, okay? So athletes should always be focused on the first in a set of limiters before they work on the next one. So if we believe that mental fitness is the limiter, then that's what we should be working on with our primary focus. Many times athletes get so caught up in working on their physical fitness that they're not even targeting the specific limiters that are actually stopping them on race day. And you know, that perfect example is the athlete who's very physically fit, has great training metrics, but day after day they're not having the race results, okay? So without a solution to the first limiter, the others really don't have any consequence because those are the ones that are limiting the day, okay? And, you know, in my experience, for those athletes that have that situation, it's a very difficult situation because they become very frustrated. They feel that their training is very, very good. They feel that they've done everything they can in their preparation to make the outcome successful. And at the end of the day, it's not successful. So they start to go down a very slippery slope. And most of the time, they don't turn around and really review their mental fitness in the correct way and view it very in a way that's very open and really sit down and formally go over it. They may think, boy, I'm just getting low confidence. I better go out and train harder. It'll create confidence. But they're not using specific tools. They're not reviewing the race, going back, writing things down, saying, what was I thinking when this happened? And that's really what we're trying to target here, is a more formal approach to assessing mental fitness. Okay. So what is optimal mental fitness? In my mind, optimal mental fitness is no fear of failure during the activity. You're very in the moment. You're not necessarily thinking about the performance or the outcomes during the event itself. You're very narrowly focused on the activity at hand and your process-related goals, okay? So these athletes who do this very well, they almost have the ability to have an involuntary experience out there. It just sort of happens. When you ask them afterwards how the race went, why did you do this, what made you go after this pack on the swim when you knew you were 50 yards behind, they say, I don't know, we didn't discuss it, coach, I just did it. That's the type of atmosphere we're shooting here for. It's thinking of these task-relevant items only, not really going outside of that, starting to think about outcomes, starting to think of, boy, I'm behind where I usually am, my friend is up the road, I'm usually ahead of him. It's more around, I'm in the moment, I'm on my wattage, my race nutrition is this, and very inside of the moment and very controlled thoughts, okay? The other piece of optimal mental fitness in my mind is the ability to control that arousal level. So athletes who are getting overly excited before the race, not even excited, but overly anxious about the race, okay? Many times it starts 5 days out and then progresses to 3 days out, and then on race morning, they get to the point where they're so overly aroused that they can't even control or be able to handle their race morning breakfast. So the thoughts are just running rampant. They're jumping around, very helter-skelter, and it just becomes a very difficult mental atmosphere to have an ideal performance state. Okay, so when you can't even focus on the activity itself because you're so nervous, then you're probably over-aroused. So the best athletes have the ability to control that excitement level going into the race. Okay, and we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail shortly. Just to quickly review, there's generally two types of athletes. No athlete is all one of these types, and even an athlete who's more oriented to one of these types, they may be a little bit further from that in one race atmosphere versus another race atmosphere. So the general two types of athletes are those that are motivated by the avoidance of failure, that's the MAF athlete, and those athletes who are motivated by the achievement of success. And generally the MAS athlete, it's a little bit easier to create race day performances with the MAS athletes versus the MAF athletes. The MAF athletes tend to easily have negative thoughts enter their mind or lack confidence because they're sort of motivated by trying to avoid failure versus, boy, I really want to step up here and I'm willing to take on people that I think can beat me, but it's really close and I'm ready for that challenge. That's the MAS athlete, okay? At the end of the day, taking the same approach for all athletes, just like training itself, is not the most successful or productive approach. There's things I could say to an MAF athlete that would absolutely crush them and make them doubt themselves more versus an MAS athlete who, if I say the same thing to, actually ends up being very motivating because they want to rise to that challenge. A perfect example would be to an MAF athlete if I said, boy, you really took that workout a little bit too easy. Why didn't you go harder? That was a little bit weaker than I expected. That'll have them doubt themselves even more so than maybe they already are. If I say that same thing to an MAS athlete, okay, who's motivated by the achievement of success, the athlete rises to the occasion and says, boy, I'll show him. Next time I do this workout, I'm going to absolutely crush it. Okay, so that's the simple example there between those different types of athletes. A quick word on motivation. I think this is an important one to understand. So intrinsic motivation, this is really the athlete's desire to compete at the end of the day, and it's what allows the athletes to get up every morning. It's the love for the game, okay? Most triathletes do not have trouble with this. It's why we're out here doing Ironmans, long course racing, things that are very painful, gets us up every day. The reason why I wanted to bring up intrinsic motivation is that if you see this start to wane, you need to take a step back and say, okay, wait a minute, what's going on? Is there a bigger picture issue? In my experience, when I start to see the intrinsic motivation wane, meaning the athlete comes to me and says, coach, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. It's starting to get really difficult. I've been doing it a long time. I don't have the love of it anymore. I don't know why I get up. I don't know why I do this anymore. There's almost always a bigger picture item going on. It's either with physical health, meaning they're overtrained, hormonal issues, and or iron deficient, or there's a bigger picture mental health issue going on, depression, for example. So again, as soon as you see that intrinsic motivation start to wane, you take a step back and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Am I systematically fatigued? Is there a mental health issue? Okay, so athletes can certainly be intrinsically motivated but lack the mental fitness. So they can be very intrinsically motivated, meaning they still love the game, they still want to do it for a long time, but they're having mental fitness limiters on race day. Maybe they're not using their mental fitness tools as well as they could to enhance the performance. Okay. So the extrinsic motivation is a little bit more straightforward, so that's more reward-based and more influenced by the athlete. That comes down to a little bit more in the vicinity of mental fitness and some of the tools that were used here. These are the 5 primary areas that I like to focus on when it comes to mental fitness. These are quite common. Most of the sports psychology references out there use a similar set of these. Some of them use more, some of them use less, some of them are a little bit different. But I like to boil it down to these 5. The first one is confidence, the athlete's ability to strike a confident atmosphere, their ability to use imagery successful for race day and for key training sessions, their ability to control their energy level leading into key training sessions and leading into races, of course. Their ability to use a good self-talk mantra on race day and in training sessions to help them do things that at least bring them to their physical ability and sometimes beyond, right? And then, of course, number 5 is focus on race day. So is your mind wandering? Are you starting to focus on outcome-related things? Are you thinking about what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow? Or are we focused on the activity, my wattage, my pace, my nutrition, my form, my technique, very process-related goals? So that's where we want to have the focus. So now I'm going to go into each one of these in a little bit more detail. The first one being confidence. So most of the time, the support system should generally use a more positive reinforcement approach. I've certainly seen scenarios where the athlete support system, and just to define that, it's typically the athlete's spouse, the athlete's family, their coach for sure if they have a coach. That's what I consider the athlete's support system. But generally, that support system should take a positive approach instead of a negative approach. And many times, the spouse doesn't even realize the pressure that they put on their husband or wife. Many times just their demeanor or something they may say may put additional pressure on the athlete. We should always encourage the support system to take a positive approach and put a positive spin on whatever the situation may be, okay? Most support systems are pretty good with this, but I've certainly seen some that aren't, and it really does hurt the athlete at the end of the day. So, for the most part, it's really at the end result, it's up to the athlete to make sure that they're discussing this stuff with their support system. So the athlete should not be afraid to discuss the type of reinforcement that works for them with their support system. So if you're out there right now and you feel, as you think about it, as I talk about this, that your spouse puts undue pressure on you, at the end of the day, they just want to see you do well. Make sure you go back to them and talk to them and say, listen, the type of reinforcement you give me right now adds additional pressure. Can you try to use these words? Can you try to do more of this in these situations, okay? Create that positive atmosphere. Next one is, athletes should always think and act confidently, and just, really read into the way and the words that I use there. They should think and act confidently. I didn't say they should definitely be confident all the time. I said they should think and act confidently. So as athletes think and act confidently, eventually it becomes a reality. And, this is the typical fake it till you make it type routine. So even if you don't know that you're confident right now, if you start thinking and acting that way, the way you carry yourself, eventually it'll become a reality. Some of the athletes who aren't very confident, they tend to mope around, they keep their shoulders down, they don't look up. You take that same athlete and have them go a few months of keeping their shoulders back, chest out, strong, eyes up. Eventually they start to come around, so it can really go a long way, okay? The other thing is if you feel that you aren't confident, let's try to dig into why. Take an exercise, spend 10 or 15 minutes, and write down or discuss with your coach all the pressures that you may be feeling. Write down the top 15, and then look at the pile and say, okay, which ones of these are real pressures, and then which ones of these are just totally self-imposed. I'm putting these on myself. And just having those written down and being able to separate the ones that may be self-imposed can go a long way. You'd be surprised how many athletes put self-imposed pressures on. And here I mean pressures that the athlete is sort of made up and put on themselves. For instance, many spouses are very, very supportive of their endeavors. And the athlete may perceive that, boy, if I don't do well here, my husband knows I've been out training, they're going to be so disappointed with me, and they're putting self-imposed pressure on. When at the end of the day, we're all just doing this to have fun and be happy for the most part. So that's totally a self-imposed pressure in 90% of the cases. So just that little exercise of writing the pressures down and just seeing them there on a piece of paper can be helpful to you in most cases. But then separating out the self-imposed ones from the real ones, okay? And, for some of the pros and elites, there's certainly real pressures out there. And sure, if I don't race well today, I may not make the money I need to pay my rent or whatever it may be. And those are real. They just need to be mitigated. And even just writing them down in some cases can be helpful. The last one when it comes to confidence is make sure you learn from bad races and take a totally objective review of every piece of the race and make sure you remove any doubt from it. So many times athletes will have a bad race and they just immediately think, okay, what's the next race? Where can I go and redeem? Well, why should I expect to have a better race at race number 2 if I didn't even go back and review from a mental perspective what things I could have done better in preparation from a mental fitness preparation standpoint? What thoughts could have I done a better job with on race day? How can we expect to have a better result if we don't address those things and take action to fix them? Specific action, okay? So don't be afraid to go back and objectively review the race, every piece of it, and just to remove any doubt that, okay, here is what I was thinking before the start of the race. Here's where I was at the starting line. My excitement level was a 10 out of 10. It should have been around a 5. So next time I know I need to go back and try to control my thoughts and lower the excitement level. What was I doing on the bike? I was thinking about outcomes. Why was I thinking about where first place was? Why was I thinking about where first in my age group was when I was only 1 hour into a 10-hour race? These are all not task-relevant items, so why wasn't I thinking about the task at hand? That's just one example of the way to objectively review your race that you think may be mentally limited and try to remove doubt from it, okay? So the successful athlete realizes that if you have a bad day, we need those. That's our one mechanism to actually learn something and improve. So the successful athlete realizes that those bad days are required to learn and improve. Okay, so after confidence, here we're discussing imagery. So imagery is a great practice for athletes to use to create the right mental atmosphere and actually rehearse the race before it even starts. And, most athletes realize that this is a mental fitness tool that's out there. Very, very few actually use it in a formal way, and it can be very, very helpful. And even those athletes who are mentally fit already can use imagery to further enhance their performances. Okay, typically best used before key training days, maybe just the night before key training days and before key events, key race events, for example. You just have to spend, I'll even say just 10 minutes, 10 to 30 minutes right before you go to sleep in bed is totally sufficient. Close your eyes. And here I'm going to talk about 3 different types of imagery and what the uses are of each. So before key races, consider doing imagery the final 3 to 4 nights before the race. And, in training, you typically have a key session that's important at least 1 or 2 times a week, so we should be doing imaging before those as well. A couple different types. So we have best performance imagery. This is where you sort of image the race that you remember that everything just went right. You felt great. You felt like you perceived that you had a great result at the end of the day. You were in the moment. You were very task relevant. You're imaging what that felt like. What were some of the sights? What were the sounds? How did it feel to race in that mental atmosphere? And it's just practicing and getting in the groove of feeling in the correct atmosphere. Okay. The next one would be coping imagery. So this is where you actually image the race that's going to happen. And for most of the races that you are doing, you've probably been to the course at some point. You may have raced there before. So you sort of know what you're up against. If you haven't raced there before, review the course, even if you just do it online, so you start to understand it. And then when you image, you can image that course in particular and actually get a dry run on the race course before you even get out there. So with coping imagery, we image something going wrong, like a flat tire, where we just have a flat tire, that dreadful sound of the air letting loose. This is where you imagine something going wrong, but then you image yourself staying calm, actually fixing the flat and moving on. So another scenario for a short course race would be for an athlete who loses the pack. So they image themselves losing the pack, but then sort of keeping their cool, drifting over in that direction, and then making a big effort to catch on the back of the pack and get back there. So it's sort of rehearsing some of the things that could go wrong and controlling the excitement level, controlling the anxiety, staying focused, staying in the game, not thinking about outcomes. The common scenario is that you get the flat right away. The athlete starts thinking, oh man, all these people are going by me. I'm losing time. I'm 5 minutes behind. I'm 4 minutes behind. So this is very untask relevant thinking. We're thinking about outcomes when we shouldn't be. We should be thinking about the task. Okay, I have a flat. I need to fix it. Where's my tube? Boom, boom, boom. And the flat ends up going much smoother. You stay calm and relaxed. You get right back into the race, get right back to your pace or wattage. Many athletes totally blow this. They get the flat. They start thinking about how far back they are. They then fumble with their flat. They blow a CO2. They're very nervous. They're not calm at all. Then when they get back on the bike, they're not reasonable with their pacing approach. They take off out of there. They try to make up time. And it's all the incorrect approach. So instead, we'd rather image that coping mechanism of staying calm and doing it correctly. With success imagery, this is the most popular imagery. Almost everybody in sport probably knows what success imagery is, but this is where you imagine the race day, you imagine the gun going off, you imagine yourself in that ideal performance state from a mental fitness standpoint, and everything goes right. You feel smooth, you're going fast, and you're confident from start to finish. That's success imagery on the actual course of the day. So those are the three different types of imagery. They all have a use. They're all helpful. I recommend just rotating through all three of them anytime you do imagery sessions. Okay, next one is energy control. So here we want to really try to strike that arousal medium where you're not totally over anxious and you're not totally under anxious. So we want to try to strike that 5 out of 10. I call this the ideal performance state. Many of sports psychology references call it the IPS. Okay, again, it's best assessed 3 to 4 days out from race day. Just sit down and say, okay, where am I now out of 10? Okay, I'm around a 7. All right, I'm a little bit overdone. Let me try to do some breathing mechanisms. Let me try to control myself, understand where my training's at, why am I anxious, where are the self-imposed pressures, do that exercise about writing down the pressures, and try to bring that anxiety level down to about a 5 out of 10. That's ideal, okay? And we want to be at that 5 out of 10. 3 days out, we want to be there at the starting line, okay? So when athletes are under-aroused, many times they're not able to push themselves to new physical best. That's why it's important to have some level of arousal. We don't want to be a 1 all the time and sort of forcing ourselves to be out there racing. When athletes are over-aroused, that's the obvious one. I've already discussed it a bit. They begin easily focusing on non-task relevant items. So it's easy to make mistakes, okay? And here I just say task irrelevant items, so very similar to non-task relevant items, same thing. Easy to make mistakes in that state. You're very nervous, difficult to get down race morning breakfast. I think athletes start thinking about outcomes a lot easier in this type of a state. So it's just important to try to strike that 5 out of 10. You'll find you race best in that ideal performance state. So where it becomes important here is the athlete's ability to harness this energy level, to ramp it up or ramp it down is a really important characteristic to mental fitness. And I find that a lot of the things that I've already discussed in terms of self-imposed pressures, the MAF athlete versus the MAS, it all relates to this energy control, and the end result is where this energy control ends up and how anxious they are at the starting line, which many times relates to how they use mental fitness during the race. Okay, so related to harnessing your ability to ramp it up or ramp it down, how do we do this? It's easy for me to say here and say, oh, you should just try to, if you're at a 9 or a 10, why don't you just get it to a 5? But in reality, using some of the exercises helps a lot. Also using cue words or scripts, which I'm going to talk about shortly, can be helpful. Specific words or scripts that you've developed for yourself in particular situations to help calm yourself down. We'll also talk about some breathing techniques that can be used. The other thing that helps here is trying to develop some training sessions that give similar pressures to that of race day. Many times athletes take a long break from racing and they just don't experience that anxiety of race morning, and just practicing that anxiety and feeling it more often can practice your ability to control energy levels. So developing training sessions that are key sessions that you perceive as very important to my overall mental fitness and progress. If you perceive it that way, it creates a pressure, allows you to do imagery the night before, and allows you to control your energy level leading into the start of that event or training day. And sometimes it helps to do key sessions with friends, because it creates some self-imposed pressure. Remember, if you go back to my original definition, it was really about putting your ego on the line. And when you start doing key training sessions with friends, it puts that ego on the line and creates this competitive atmosphere, which leads to some more anxiety and allows us to practice our energy control. This is where the squad concept of training can be very useful, or training camps, periodic training camps. So further discussing the energy control concept and just understanding this concept of the inverted U, I think can go a long way. Many athletes don't understand the concept, and it's tough to control your anxiety level if you don't understand the concept or what you're shooting for. So here's the inverted U concept. This is fairly standard stuff in sports psychology. Generally, the arousal level, if it's very, very low, I like to use the 10 scale. If it's a 1 out of 10, you're not going to get the best performance out of your physical fitness that you possibly could. Conversely, if you're a 10 out of 10, you're probably not going to get the performance of your physical performance out of you that you may be capable of. We want to be somewhere around that 5. That's where we create the ideal performance state and actually have the best performances. So we're always shooting for that 5, and then we're trying to use tools and mechanisms, cue words, exercise about writing down self-imposed pressures to try to control that arousal level. Okay, so here getting into self-talk. So a few examples here, and this is very, very specific to the athlete, but I think actually writing down what some of your self-talk routines are can be helpful. If you know you're starting to focus on non-task relevant items, if you find your mind wandering, meaning losing focus, if you find yourself having overly energized or aroused state before races or during the race, developing scripts for different situations can be helpful. So write down your situations first that you think you've had trouble with. So for instance, I get very nervous. So write down nervous. I find that when I hurt, I don't push hard enough. I kind of wimp out. So then write down hurting. And then start to develop some specific keywords or mantras or cues that you're going to use to help in those situations control yourself. I just put 2 examples here. So under the nervous category, maybe my cue word for that or script is keep your cool. So every time I start to feel myself becoming nervous, maybe I start saying to myself, keep your cool, keep your cool, keep your cool. If I find that I tend to wimp out and when I start to hurt, I just sort of give up and I say, you know what, I don't like this pain. I'm going to try to avoid it. Maybe I use a script like be strong, like I have here, and something that I repeat to myself every time I start to hurt in that manner. Okay, so I guess the end result here is that the athlete should develop cue words for the different scenarios that they may have and scripts. Cue words are very simple, just a simple word. A script is, maybe a phrase or multiple words like I have above here. So, if maybe you're feeling slow or you perceive yourself slow on race day, maybe I state to myself over and over again, snappy, 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 and try to get myself out of this, oh boy, I'm just so slow right now, just so slow. So you change the internal self-talk. Many times athletes can get into a very negative self-talk very easily where they're starting to think about outcomes. Oh boy, I'm so behind. I can't believe I'm having a bad day again. Oh, my family, my coach, my sponsor are going to be so upset with me. Don't even go there. Don't even if you are quite sure that it's a poor day, you shouldn't be going down these negative self-talk pathways. Instead, you should immediately revert to your scripts and cue words that you have for that situation, that you've already rehearsed in training, you've rehearsed in the weeks leading up to the race. You know exactly what words or cues you should use in that particular atmosphere. Okay, so it's getting very formal with it. And believe me, for those of you that have, that's why I discussed that limiter conversation up front. If the mental fitness is limiting the day, if you really believe that after taking an objective look at things in the way I've discussed, then being out there training for more hours isn't necessarily going to help you at all. I mean, many times the training can help provide a little bit of confidence, but at this level, if mental fitness is really the issue and it's not physical fitness, then let's sit down and spend the hour instead trying to take care of the mental fitness issues and use some of these formal exercises to help eliminate it. Okay. Here's another great one. If you're out there perceiving the event as a bad day, so you're starting to get negative, you're starting to have negative self-talk, of course use the cue words and the scripts. But on top of that, it's always good if you're perceiving it as a bad day to start focusing on some of the process goals. Okay. Where's my technique right now? If it's the swim, where's my arm position? Am I creating a high elbow? Am I keeping my head in the right position? Focus on the process. Stay away from the outcomes. Stay away from the negative self-talk. Let's make something out of the day. Let's focus on the process. Focus on the technique. Focus on staying aero in the bike, for example. Many times athletes who give up on the day, really easy to say, hell with this. I'm just going to ride in my drive. Instead of riding the aero bars, I'm just going to ride on the hoods of my brakes. Not a good place to be. It's a great opportunity to practice some of the process stuff and mechanics and get positives out of the day instead of letting it all slide. It really doesn't help any of us. Okay, so here discussing focus. Write down what you plan to focus on for each sport before race day is a great exercise to do. Instead of just finding yourself out there just sort of mind wandering. As soon as the mind starts to wander, you don't have you don't have process goals to think about. It's easy to start thinking about outcomes and starting to think about some of the more negative stuff out there and task irrelevant items. So having a formal plan, actually writing down what you plan to focus on for each sport before race day. Okay, swim, I'm going to focus on head position. I'm going to focus on not losing feet. I'm going to focus on staying confident and just writing those down. And I'm just making examples here. Similar on the bike. I'm going to focus on rotating between making sure I'm staying aero, making sure I keep my seat position back, making sure I focus on my race fueling, making sure I check my wattage every 1 minute, whatever it may be. So very process related, and writing these things down before you get out there. Many athletes don't do this at all. And even the ones that are very good mentally, if they're not doing this, maybe there's things they could be doing better, and they find themselves just out there, boy, where's my head going? Where are the outcomes right now? I expected to be further ahead, so on and so forth. So it can be very, very helpful to have a more specific focused plan for race day. All right. From a focus standpoint, as you objectively go back and review a race, even if it was a race that went well, you should always go back and try to assess what your covert thinking was. Okay, what was I thinking when? What was I thinking when this happened? Or what was I thinking when I got the flat tire? Did I control my anxiety level, or did I let it run rampant? What was I thinking when I was halfway through the swim and the pack I was swimming with just all of a sudden disappeared? Did I allow my mind to wander that allowed me to lose the pack? Physically, I think I could have stayed with them, but I think I just had a little lapse in focus. So many athletes who have the poor race, where there's probably a lot of focus issues during the race, again, they don't want to think about the race at all. They don't want to rehearse that because it was so miserable. So they immediately think forward. Okay, what's my next race? And they just think that that's going to allow them to feel better, allow them to try to redeem themselves. And again, they didn't fix the issues they had at race number 1, so they get the same outcome at race number 2. So going back and reviewing the race objectively and reviewing some of the focus items is super important. Don't try not to use past thinking at all. Stay task relevant. If you find yourself starting to become non-task relevant, just immediately divert to task relevant thoughts. This is a little bit redundant, this bullet, but I really want to drive it home. If you find yourself starting to think about outcomes when you're halfway through the event, immediately divert to what's my wattage, what's my pace compared to my plan. Did I have my last power bar that I was supposed to? And focusing on technique and the process-related stuff. Try not to get involved with past thinking. Oh boy, my last race was really bad, so that means if this one is bad, I'm going to end up in a worse place. So making sure you stay out of those types of mantras and staying focused on that task-relevant stuff. So just a couple examples that I put together here for more of the common scenarios. So one would be the athlete who has shaky confidence. They don't feel that they're ultimately confident in the way that could actually enhance their performances on race, or enhance their physical fitness. One helpful exercise is just to develop a quick success log that you use throughout the season where you write down successes from training sessions. So if you find yourself in a string of poor races where you're starting to get down on yourself, you feel yourself starting to lose that confidence that maybe you once had, maybe you never had it, but sitting down and actually writing down some of the successes from the training sessions that you may have, and most of the time you can pull something successful out of almost any training session or race day that even went poor. So keeping the success log in just a simple Excel sheet where on each row you write down successes, the date, what the session was, can be really helpful to start creating a more positive atmosphere. And some of this stuff may sound silly, but just the exercise of writing it down and bringing those positives to the surface can be a confidence booster. And then as you go to race day and you feel yourself starting to lack confidence, you go back and review that log and say, oh yeah, I had all these successes, and it creates a more positive atmosphere. If you find yourself becoming less confident leading into an important race, try to remind yourself of some of the basics that are in place that you rely on for success. So maybe your support system, your spouse, your family, your health. These things are just basics that many people take for granted, and most of the time you have those there. You just need to go back and say, wait a minute, I have the main things, I have the basics that I need to have confidence and have success. Can go a long way. So monitor the self-talk. Make sure you're monitoring it on a daily basis. Think back and say, okay, what was my self-talk today? I did a training session today. How was my self-talk? Was I constantly saying, boy, I can't believe how slow this is again? Or were we, again, diverting to the more task-relevant items? Okay, make sure the self-talk stays positive. Use the cue words. Use the scripts to make sure that self-talk stays positive. And just reviewing it, a lot of athletes who lack confidence, who are in a tough place from a mental fitness standpoint, they don't realize, they don't assess that how negative their self-talk is all the time, training sessions and on race day. So what you're saying to yourself is very, very important. So if you sit back and assess it and say, you know what, that was really negative, I didn't even realize it, then let's improve it. Let's write down the things that next time we're going to focus on. Put together that focus plan. So imaging the past performances where you've created success helps improve confidence. So here I'm just wrapping together a lot of concepts that for an athlete who lacks confidence, the tools we can use to help fix that scenario. Visualizing the future performances and seeing and feeling those performances live up to their capability and live up to their physical fitness. All these exercises here help improve confidence in the less confident athlete. Here's an example for an athlete that may come to his or her coach and say, I really think we should change training when there's an important event coming up or something like this. So let's run through some key items related to this. So the thing to remind yourself is that the importance of the event should not change the approach that you know has worked for you in the past from a physical perspective. But the same thing goes with mental preparation. So if you have a specific mental preparation routine, don't change it. If you know it works, or if it hasn't worked, then you do know you need to change it. But in this case, if it's worked for you in the past, there's no reason to change it going into a key event or an event that has more importance. It's so common for athletes to all of a sudden have a very important race. They just want to change things. So 2 to 3 weeks out, it's like, boy, well, shouldn't we do more of these sessions? Shouldn't we do more of those? Sit back, say, wait a minute. I know this has worked in the past. I'm going to do what's worked for me in the past so that I get that result that I know has been a good result in the past at this key race, and not roll the dice out there. Okay? So remind yourself that you trust your training and your racing strategy. It's worked for you in the past, you trust it, and you stick to that, and that goes a long way in improving the confidence also for the athlete. Adhering to the mental preparation techniques, and we went through a lot of tools here already tonight, but adhering to this mental preparation approach, making it more formal, going through some of the specific tools that I've discussed in a more formal way goes a long way, okay? So, the last bullet I've already discussed, it's about the mental skills training, and if you know it's worked for you in the past, then there's no reason to change it for a key event. Here's an example for increased anxiety. So the athlete who cannot control their energy level or arousal level leading into the race, they're striking an 8 or 9 out of 10 all the time. Just a few exercises. So learn to control those thoughts, and then the physical responses. So typically the heart rate goes up, perspiration may go up. These are I think of these as gauges on a car, and they are an indicator that there's something going on with the thoughts. So we need to be able to control the thoughts to be able to control the physical responses. Many times the thoughts and physical responses go hand in hand because they say, boy, every time I feel my heart rate go up like this, I know my thoughts get out of control. When in reality it was the thoughts that were out of control first. But the whole thing is a vicious loop. And, it's important that the athlete can break that loop and control their thoughts to begin with. So one exercise is just controlled breathing, so breathing in through the nose, filling up the stomach, not the chest. Pause and breathe out through the mouth. So if it's an hour before the race, you're sitting in transition, your transition area is already set up, using these breathing techniques can go a long way to help control the anxiety level if you've sat back and assessed it and you feel that it's beyond a 5 out of 10. Okay. The next one would be progressive muscle relaxation. This is where you try to relax each muscle group sort of in order. You could start in your face and work your way down, or work on the bottom and work your way up. It can also be done in a tension relaxation mode where you tense a muscle and then relax it and then work to the next one, so on and so forth. Meditation is also not a bad option to help control anxiety if it's very chronic in training on a day-to-day basis. But these distracting thoughts are bound to appear, and you should expect them. So athletes who have trouble with controlling their energy level, they need to understand that they're going to feel like this. You need to learn to expect it. It's not a surprise that this is here. I know that I get anxious, so expect it. And once you learn to expect it and know that it's going to come, then you can start to learn how to control it. Many people just try to say, boy, I hope it doesn't happen this race. I just hope it doesn't happen again. They just call it. And when they take that approach, well, guess what? It happens again, and then they don't have any toolbox as a way or mechanism to help control it. So instead of taking that approach of, I just hope it doesn't happen, expect it's going to happen, because it's going to come. You're going to start to get these thoughts. You're going to have the physical responses. Let's instead learn how to control it. Okay? Again, we could use coping imagery for this. We could say, I picture myself getting anxious at the starting line. I picture it happening. And now I image myself actually being able to control my thoughts and calm myself down using some of the breathing techniques to control the energy level. So that's the key there, just understanding that it is going to happen and expecting it and then being able to control it. Okay? So use the relaxation keywords or scripts. Those I discussed already if you feel the energy level starting to get too high. A common one for many athletes that works well is reminding yourself of successful sessions that you've had in the past, all the tough training sessions. Helps calm you and create confidence and bring the energy level down. And also be careful with caffeine. These athletes can respond adversely to caffeine. Many athletes these days are using caffeine automatically due to a lot of the physiological research out there from a physical perspective, and there's no question that it does work. However, for the athletes that are striking too high of an energy level, caffeine just exacerbates it, increases some of the physical responses that can create anxiety. So, we want to stay away from caffeine if you know energy level control is an issue for you. The general process that I like to use, and I use this on a micro level. So just to step back a second, I've went through the 5 primary areas and tools that I like to address when it comes to mental fitness. This is the general approach that's healthy in terms of goal setting from both a long-term perspective and short-term perspective on race day. So as you lay out your season, many athletes start the season, they say, I want to qualify for Kona. That's the wrong approach. You're starting directly with outcomes. You have no idea whether you're in a position to create the right targets or if you're even tough enough to be able to do the training required to get to Kona. So instead, I encourage you to sit back, say, okay, what are my goals this season? Meaning, am I going to be tough? I'm not going to give up. I'm going to hit all my training sessions. I'm not going to, I'm going to make sure I'm going to take care of my nutrition. I'm going to get to the body composition I need to. Lay down those goals first. That's the most important thing. If you cannot hit those goals, those are things you have 100% control over. So if you cannot hit those from a long-term perspective, then you have no business even thinking about outcomes yet. Because what we find is that the goals and targets come together, and the outcomes are really just a byproduct of those goals and targets. So that's how we look at it from a long-term basis. Same thing on race day. On race day, it's at the starting line. Okay, I'm going to be tough out here. I'm not going to give up no matter how hard it gets. So as you're on the bike, first you assess the goals. You say, am I being tough? Am I not giving up? Okay, yes, those are good. Next, I'm going to move to my targets. Okay, I had planned to ride 250 watts. Am I riding 250 watts? And focusing on the targets. Okay, yes, I am riding 250 watts. Last thing you start to focus on is outcomes. Where am I in my age group? Where am I placing? You know, for long course events, thinking about outcomes at hour 4 is only going to hurt you. If you start thinking, boy, I'm behind already, it creates a negative self-mantra, a negative self-talk. And at the end of the day, it's probably going to have you overpace the early portion of the bike, which is going to come around and bite you at the end anyway. So we need to make sure we're focusing on the things we have 100% control over first. Then the targets, those are items that we do have quite a bit of control over because they're directly connected to our training. Hopefully you've assessed and come up with good pacing targets for race day. And then last, outcomes. For most people, there's no reason to think about outcomes in Ironman until the last maybe 2 or 3 miles. There you can start to look, okay, where am I in my age group? There's someone in my age group who's right up the road. I could see him. They're 100 yards up there. I got to go get him. And that's where you could do it. You know, for the pros and elites, and sometimes the higher level pros and elites, you could start thinking about it earlier than that. But for most age groupers, it's the last maybe 5K of an Ironman race, okay? Primary focus should definitely be at the top of the list. I touched on caffeine, but generally caffeine is something that can be used for enhancement of mental fitness if you're striking too low of an energy level. For instance, if you're a higher level athlete or an advanced age grouper who goes to a local sprint, you're probably not striking that IPS, that ideal performance state where you have a good energy level. That may be a good race to use caffeine to try to bring up the energy level or arousal level a little bit. For an athlete who's at a race where they're overly anxious already, using caffeine can be a detriment. So that was the scenario that I discussed a little bit earlier. Typically, the addition of caffeine for the MAF athletes, those athletes that are motivated by the avoidance of failure, can easily overshoot that arousal medium on race day and create that negative self-mantra, which doesn't help anyone. It gets into this very negative spiral and typically does not create a good mental atmosphere. So for the MAS athlete, those motivated by the achievement of success, caffeine can help in the situations where they're under-aroused. That's that athlete who goes to the local sprint, okay? So the key is to think about the type of athlete that you are and how you may perceive the event that's coming up, and think about whether or not that's going to create the right arousal level and excitement level, and based on that, make an intelligent choice about the caffeine. Just remember, it's not the main thing I'm trying to bring up here is that it's not just a physical tool. It's also deeply impacts the mental side of things. So here, just wrapping things up, last couple slides, I just want to discuss an interesting concept. You know, what does it take at the elite level? An interesting thing that I recently realized and discussed with some other coaches is that the elites typically have some sort of a tough upbringing in their childhood or something in their life that was a very difficult situation. Maybe they were brought up by a single parent, maybe they had a tough brother and sister that beat them up all the time, or whatever it may be. But we find that most of the elites have this type of upbringing, something that implants what I like to call the gremlin. So they have something in there, an axe to grind, something that gets them up every day, and they are tough, okay? I call this sort of the gremlin, all right? So these athletes typically race with that certain toughness on race day, and it just drives them day after day on the back burner. So many times, though, I find these athletes become challenging to have a current state of that sharp mental fitness and mental health that I've discussed here. So many times, if an athlete was abused as a child or really had a tough upbringing, many times their mental health isn't that good in their current state. So what I find is that the athletes that tend to perform the best on a consistent basis at the elite level, they have this gremlin implanted from their childhood, but whatever's happened over the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they've gotten to a place in their life where they're confident and they're mentally fit with a lot of the tools and items that I've discussed in this presentation. And they're able to sort of use that gremlin to their advantage. So as you look at the elite field these days, you find that most of them had a gremlin implanted at some point in their life, but they're currently in a very mentally fit state and mentally healthy state. So I call this scenario the happy gremlin, and many times this is the ideal performance state at the elite level, this happy gremlin scenario. Just really wrapping things up here, some great reference material. I covered a lot of things tonight. Here's a few great references that I am very, very well acquainted with, and you'll find a lot of similar stuff to what I've discussed in these, and more specific exercise and tools that you can use, very detailed stuff, worksheets and that sort of thing. The first two are actually done by the USOC, by the United States Olympic Committee. These were created a few years ago. They're great, great guides. They have a coach's guide and the analogous athlete's guide, and those two work together so the coach and the athlete can use their manuals and be talking the same language. But you know, if there are coaches on this call, I recommend that you get both. If there are athletes on this call, I recommend you at least get the athlete's guide. It's very, very good if you feel that mental fitness may be a limiter for you. And another very practical one that is very good by James Lohr, and he's been writing sports psychology books for quite a while. It's not too difficult of a read at all. His latest, or I don't think it's his latest, but this one's one of the newer ones, but it's called The New Toughness Training for Sports, a very, very good little book. So great references to try to check out if you want to dig into this stuff a little bit deeper. At the end of the day, you know, this is the goal when everything comes together, very confident atmosphere, very strong, very happy with the result. So that's everything that I had tonight, and now I'm going to take questions in the questions box. So if there are any questions, feel free to dump them right into that box. And I don't see any questions coming through. If you cannot find the questions box, feel free to put them into the chat and I will see them there. Okay, we do have one question. Okay, we have a couple questions coming through now. Okay, I missed the first 30 minutes of the webinar. Is there a way I can replay it? We do record all of the webinars. They get posted to the QT2 member area, which is accessed by QT2 clients. For those of you on the webinar who paid in, if you'd like to receive the recorded version of this, just send us an email at the services address and we'll get you out the recorded link within a couple days. Okay. Do you feel that there are other things in your diet you should eliminate that can negatively affect the mental state, such as sugar, alcohol, processed food, etc.? I 150% agree with that. That's a great, great point. Again, if you step back to one of my early points, it was you cannot create mental fitness or physical fitness or speed for that matter without mental health and physical health. So that's where this comes in. If you're creating a physically healthy state, it creates confidence. The mind sort of follows the physical health. So a great saying is, you know, make a healthy body, and the mind follows the body. And you know, if you're constantly drinking alcohol and/or having sugar and/or having carbohydrates, number one, chances are the body composition is not where you'd like it to be. Therefore, that in itself creates a very tough confidence atmosphere and creates poor mental fitness. So, you know, absolutely, I think the nutrition plays into it just as much as anything else. If you're eating a clean diet full of micro and macronutrients, you know, creating a very healthy atmosphere, that's an atmosphere that breeds confidence versus an unhealthy atmosphere. Okay. A question here about the reference books. Can you show the reference books again? And absolutely. Here are the reference books. I'll just leave those up in case anyone else wants to jot them down. Just moving on to the next question. Okay, next question is, do you think that having a goal of going to Kona is too broad for someone? How would you approach this question with someone you coach? Okay, that's a great question. Here's the situation here. If someone comes to you as a coach, if you're a coach, and someone comes to you and says, hi, I'd like to go to Kona, you need to talk them away from that as quickly as possible. First thing you should do is say, okay, where have your previous race results been? Okay, they've been this. Okay, let's sit down and review what limiters that we think you have. What dials do we have available to turn? Okay, how's the body composition? How's the mechanics? How many years have you had in the sport? How's the durability? Are you strength limited? And then start writing those down and start assessing, okay, we think we could get this much improvement from this dial if we turn it properly. We think we get this much improvement from this dial if we turn it properly over the course of this year. And very quickly you could start to estimate that, okay, we expect X amount of improvement this year from your previous results. Then you sit back and say, okay, is that enough to get us to Kona? No, it's not. Okay, well then we're going to have to wait until next year, or maybe, yeah, maybe we do have a shot. But coming in with the outcome-related goal of, hi, I want to go to Kona, doesn't end up breeding the right mental atmosphere. And 9 times out of 10, the athletes that come in with that, unless they're supremely physically talented, they don't end up going to Kona in their lifetime. So you need to approach it differently. Approach the limiters that are there. Figure out how you're going to address each one of the limiters. And then last, say, okay, this is where we end up. Is it enough? And if it's not enough in year 1, maybe you could start to estimate that, yeah, I think over years of working on these limiters that we have here, maybe mental fitness is one of those limiters, I think by year 4 we could get to Kona, and set the expectations properly. Too many athletes come in with unreasonable expectations because they start with outcomes, not knowing whether that's reasonable or not, and they end up getting disappointed at the end of the day. Next question is, I'm not a paid member of QT2 Systems, what should I do? If you joined the webinar and you're not a member, that means you should have paid when you came in, so you know, just shoot us an email if you paid into the webinar with the $20, and we'll send you a link for sure. Do you have a concrete example of an athlete you coached who has turned around performance due to mental fitness? The answer is absolutely yes. And just to be totally transparent with this, what got me going on mental fitness in such a deep way is working at the elite level with some athletes. And you find mental fitness limiters the most at the elite level, believe it or not. See, many of the age groupers, there's so many physical things and things you could do, the easy stuff I call it, in training and nutrition and fueling that can easily improve them. And that breeds confidence. You know, if you improve somebody's half iron time by a half hour, boy, they're confident, this is great, everything's going great. See, at the elite level, when you're trying to shave off minutes and seconds in places and it doesn't happen, it's, boy, I'm not making any progress. It's really easy to start to create a negative mental atmosphere. So in working with elites, I had many athletes who were creating fantastic training performances that were PRs, better than anything they've ever done, and then going to race day and not having the outcomes. And it's so, so difficult. And I said, well, wait a minute. We're addressing everything we should be, the fueling, the execution, the preparatory activities, everything on race day, health, all that stuff, and not having outcomes. What's going on? So the athlete's making 100% of the sacrifices they should be, but not getting any gratification out on the other side. You can imagine that that's a tough place to be. So having been there, I would say twice with elite level athletes, I said there's got to be more to this, and started to really approach mental fitness in a more structured manner. And I think for me it was difficult maybe at first because I was someone who mental fitness came to fairly easily. And it was tough for me to see that mental fitness can be a real limiter and actually limit the day when someone's super physically fit. And healthy. So that prompted me to go back and do a lot of research in the area of mental fitness and start to develop some of my own stuff and own tools, and developed a lot of stuff to see here, implemented that with some of my elites, and immediately turned around some of those same people who were having a difficult time. And it was interesting to see their performances come through and get the gratification using some of the tools that I've discussed here tonight. Okay, so those are all the questions we have in the chat. We're just about out of time, so I appreciate everyone's attention tonight here on the webinar. And as always, if anyone has any suggestions on future webinars that maybe they would like to see done at QT2, we'd be happy to accommodate those. We try to do these webinars about once a month, so be happy to take the suggestions. And again, appreciate the attention, and we'll see you all soon.